For more than 25 years, James McGlinn has been building early internet startups, global tech platforms, and a ticketing system that transformed New Zealand's events industry, driven by a mindset that never accepted no.
We kept at it for far too long and we spent far too much money. I say a missed opportunity, but maybe it isn't.
He's led teams and businesses across the Asia Pacific and helped issue nearly 10 million tickets to over 150,000 events. But behind every milestone is a team, and behind every decision, real risk.
There is nothing great that you can do without a great team.
Yeah.
I really honestly believe that. If I knew what I know now about the complexities of ticketing, we would not have done it.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, we wouldn't have got into the space.
The journey started with some bold assumptions.
So we thought that if we didn't charge a booking fee or we capped a booking fee at $1, that we could take the entire market.
To greater risks and big competition.
It was terrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, it was existential.
Yes.
Right? Both Michael and I had poured all of the savings that we had into this. We didn't know what that meant for us, but we were pretty determined to fight. It would have been so easy to give up at that point, and the odds were absolutely against us. But you're never beaten until you're beaten. Every single day from then, we were looking at the stats. It was, we were in Google Analytics. How many people are coming in? What type of people are they? How do we segment them? How many pages per visit are they looking at? How do we increase engagement? How do we increase loyalty?
But after decades as a founder and a leader, one question remained. The question that I've got for you now, James, is what's it like having a job? James McGlinn, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Josh.
What a pleasure. So you've been famous, I think, for entering nascent spaces on 3 different occasions for 3 different businesses. Do you have a deep curiosity, or is it more like a bit of a demon for punishment kind of thing?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think with all of the businesses, we've started off in areas that were technically really exciting. So for me as a technologist, great to jump into really interesting spaces. And because the markets were growing, I think easier to get started. I think when you start in a growing market, you've got tailwinds, haven't you? And if you can get it right, or right more often than not, then the market can carry you. The interesting thing is with Eventfinda, we had to pivot partway through into a mature industry. And that was a lot more challenging, jumping into a space where we're competing against businesses that have been running and honing their craft for decades, 40, 50 years. That is really tough. And finding differentiation and reasons for clients to move to you and away from those bigger established players, that is a completely different type of hard work.
Yeah.
So I've had both.
And those businesses, which we will talk about, of course, are quite powerful and they have a lot to lose. And so their behaviour can be demonstrative of that sometimes, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and quite understandably, right? I mean, they compete in different ways, but also because the market's not growing as fast, they are incredibly defensive and have to be.
Yeah, they're losing market share to you, right? So you're literally taking money out of their pocket.
Yeah. Whereas in a nascent industry, everyone's winning. Everyone who's doing well is winning. As the market size increases, the size of the pie increases, everyone's share increases.
Absolutely. Now, you've mentioned the word market, I think, 4 times in the first couple of minutes of our conversation, which I love. But interestingly, your first business was as a teenager, Entertains, which was a web hosting platform. Were you thinking about a market at that stage, or was it like, I just want to do something with my skills and maybe make a bit of money? What was the impetus behind you starting your first business?
So kind of interesting. The name, I'm not a marketing person, obviously.
No,
and it's not my specialty. There's other things I think I'm much better at. Initially, I had this idea, and actually there was a business even ahead of that. So I came back as a as a kid from the Middle East for university. There was actually a prior business. So I came back from the Middle East as a 16-year-old, I think, for seventh form going into university. And I'd been studying international baccalaureate at school and doing reasonably well academically. And I came back into the New Zealand curriculum for seventh form, Rangitoto College. And I found that a lot of the academic curriculum were things that I'd already studied before. So I think a little bit bored, and whereas some kids would have found other ways to get into trouble, I decided to start a business. And my parents had been a bit entrepreneurial as I was growing up, so I'd been exposed to that. And so the first venture was actually a mail order software business. And so what I was doing was taking the fax directory, back in those days, the white pages of the small fax directory, running it through OCR with a scanner. And then overnight, when everyone was asleep, it was sending out mail order software order forms to all the businesses in the fax directory. And
You mean spamming?
I like to call
Making
it a little
high-quality
market
offers.
outreach. Yes, exactly. And so then I'd wake up the next day, and there'd be these order forms that would start coming back in, through. And people living in the house, my mum and dad, my sister would be picking up the phone, and it would be faxes trying to send messages back to us with these people's credit card details. And
On the backs.
Yeah.
I love it.
And so then I'd place these orders to the UK, US suppliers, Asian suppliers, and wait 2 weeks and then get these big packs of video games that came in and send them through the country. So that was sort of my first dipping a toe in the water with business. But I thought, look, there's this opportunity to go online and to produce websites for other people, and I was really interested in database-driven websites, which were kind of a new thing back then. And I had this crazy idea that I could put restaurant menus online and let people order food online. And that's where the name Entertains came from. It was entertainment from New Zealand, and, anyway, not great at branding.
There was a book called The Entertainment Book around about that era, because we're talking around the 90s here, aren't we? And you pay something like $50 for this book, and it would be full of vouchers like coupons. And you take them into a restaurant, and the restaurateur would always be slightly disgusted that you happened to buy this book.
Absolutely.
You'd get buy one, get one free, kind of meal situation if you buy a couple of drinks per person kind of thing. So was that one of the impetuses for the creativity?
I expect it probably was. I mean, that was like the Groupon of the 90s, right?
It was, yeah.
And, the question is, were any of those customers loyal beyond their first voucher handover? But what I decided to do was find a web hosting company where I could have a PHP website, because I'd taught myself a bit of PHP, and a MySQL database. And I found there just wasn't an option in New Zealand, so I had to get a US web host. And I thought, well, that's a little bit unreasonable, isn't it? And in my first year of university, I was doing some shift work at Datacom Systems, and I was doing sort of the 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. shift, looking after these backup systems for some of the blue chip corporates and central bank, things like that. And I thought I could get a server and put it in this data center that I'm looking after. And so I spoke to my boss at Datacom, and he said, well, yeah, if you get a server, you can put it in here. That's fine. And so I did that. I ordered a server from the US, learned how to set up Linux and put an operating system on it, and then set up a web hosting company. So that was really... That's how Entertains web hosting came along, and that business started in 1997, and all my way through university, which took me until 2004. My poor mother thought I was never going to graduate. But that's what I was doing and building that up. And I had a couple of hundred clients in there by the end, or a few hundred clients, and then sold that to another business that was doing roll-ups of much smaller web hosting companies.
Yeah, we'll get to that. 1997, so like 1995, the internet was released upon the world. Obviously, it originated in the university system back in the 1970s from memory, but people weren't able to go onto the World Wide Web until 1995, maybe even early 1996. So you are super, super early as like a university-aged kid doing this. Did you have like a realization of what you were doing, or were you just kind of following your nose and kind of, this seems interesting and there might be some money in it?
Absolutely following my nose. And it was just, at that stage, it was the evolution of what had come before us, right? So when I was in the Middle East, I was able to access the internet through, so my father worked for IBM, so I was able to access the internet through his connections. And at that stage, it was Gopher and FTP. And so the internet was connecting to FTP sites and downloading games and then putting the games onto discs and sharing them with my friends. That's how Doom came out, for example, the really first-person shooter, and that was just absolutely incredible. And then we would connect our computers through modems to each other to play games like Doom against each other. In fact, going back to even before we moved to the Middle East, I remember setting up a BBS, a bulletin board system, on the home computer. I must have been 11 years old. And again, unplugging the phones at night, plugging in the modem, then other people could dial in, they could send each other messages, play turn-based games and things like that. So this whole area has been something that's always fascinated me. And so come to 1997, and this was just the latest step in what had been an evolution of, maybe a decade before that, or not quite. But it was super exciting, but it was, we had there was no reason to think, well, this is going to absolutely take off in the way that it has. Everything's going to be online. And I remember, being in New Zealand, I think in Auckland, the Empire Tavern, putting up this URL in neon above the door and thinking, oh, well, this is really starting to go mainstream. There might be some legs in this.
Wow. So how were you selling the web hosting services of Entertains? What were you doing to get customers? What were your early sales motions like?
So that was a lot of sending out emails, a lot of word of mouth, huge word of mouth. We had some very vocal advocate clients who would be out there. And it was often people like web developers, web photographers, and other people who were creating online assets who needed a partner that they could work with. And so because I knew all of the tech side of things and literally built all of the web hosting backends, this was before control panels existed and things like that. So in the same way that I'd built all of those backends for the Entertain system and for clients to log in and manage their web hosting, clients would come to me and say, oh, hey, we've got a client that wants to put their catalog online or their marketing brochure online, or they've got this crazy idea about taking this paper database system that they've got and putting that online. And I'd just jump into all of those and say, well, that sounds like a lot of fun. Let's do it.
So you're kind of not sector specific, anything but niche, just went where the opportunity went and what the paying client could lead you to.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
But what I loved more than anything else was building those websites for other people. So that was, the great part about having a web hosting business was that there's this never-ending supply of people who wanted to host a website somewhere. And in time, we were far from the only one that were doing it. But it was the people that would then come to me and say, oh, we want to make some changes to the site, or we want the site to be dynamic, we want a database behind it, all of those things.
Yeah. So the classic story, and in fact it is CB Woodhouse's story from Orcon, who's been on the show probably 9 months or so ago. He was at university and he came across this thing called the internet, probably a pretty similar time frame actually, kind of in that mid to late 90s sort of era. And so he went, light bulb went on, and he dropped out of university. Zuckerberg, and there's many others that can slot into the same category. Yet you persevered with the university. So you were doing hands-on programming to build the websites in what was probably unstructured environments for coding, not your, but the actual coding you were doing was proper coding, not what the vibe coding that happens today, for example. And you were doing a business degree at the same time, and you were running a business. Did you kind of go, what's the reason for me doing this thing over here when I'm actually living it into a real life over there? Was that a thought pattern that you had, or were you just like, I'm committed, because you're a starter-finisher guy, so was it that I've just got to finish this thing over here as well as do this business thing over here? What was your thought pattern? Do you remember?
Yeah, I don't think there was a really well-defined strategy at that point. I did want to finish the degree, and all the time growing up, I remember that was an expectation. My parents, my mother in particular, expected that I would finish a university degree. My grandfather expected I would finish a university degree. And I wasn't particularly diligent. I think it's probably a repeating theme, but I was looking back recently through some of my school report cards, and it was the A+ for achievement, C for effort sort of thing. And that didn't change dramatically in my university studies. And so I had an office on Shortland Street, not far from where we are now, and I could walk up to lectures and then come back down to the office. And I recall there was one year I signed up for a year of classes and I didn't turn up to any of them. So it was a little doubtful at times whether I was going to be able to do both, but thankfully I did manage to get through them all. So in 2004, I graduated with the commerce degree that I'd gone after. I couldn't decide on which major, so I ended up majoring in operations management and information systems. And then along the way, I somehow picked up a science degree as well and did a computer science major there.
Yeah. So I was just reading a book the other day, and it mentioned that in the before the year 2000, only 1 in 10 New Zealanders graduated with a university degree. And the numbers, I think, were consistent that of 3 that start, only 1 finish. And so, let's say 30% started university, 10% actually left and had that experience. Were you one of the first in your family to potentially get a degree? Was that something that there was this kind of familial pressure in behind you? You started this thing, you've got to finish it? Or was it more just like I'm a completer finisher kind of person?
I think it was more I'm a completer finisher. Certainly probably one of the earlier ones, but my grandfather got a degree eventually. One of my uncles got a degree eventually.
Okay.
So it wasn't like I was feeling this pressure to be, leading the charge on the family basis. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed university, some parts of it. I remember doing a level 3 public key security infrastructure paper that everyone I spoke to said that's going to be incredibly boring, and I found it absolutely fascinating. And then I had to do a law paper, commercial law, and I just found it absolutely challenging to stay enthusiastic about it, having to remember all of the precedents, the cases, the dates of the decisions, and that I really struggled with.
I remember at my commerce degree in the 3rd or the 4th year, I was like you, I crammed 3 years into 4, but you crammed 4 into 7, so your mathematics is actually better than mine. Have I got that right? I think I have.
Something like that.
Yeah. And so we had a entrepreneurship part of one of the papers, can't recall which one that it was, and there was like a simulation run of a business, and you had all these inputs, your product, your manufacturing costs, your marketing costs, etc. And it was put into a mainframe, a computer, and then it would give you outputs based upon your different actions, your strategic levers that you pulled inside the business. And I had some kind of really minor little side hustles that I'd done through university, but nothing anywhere near as what you'd done with Entertains. And so it remained quite strongly for me in the academic sphere. I struggled to see the application of it until I got out into the workforce and started to build other people's businesses for them. So were you connecting up those 2 dots of what you were studying and what you were practicing, or were they kind of independent for you?
To a certain extent I was. There were some papers that I was doing that had really strong practical application, and then there were others that just seemed quite academic. But it's funny you mention that. I love the the focus that we have now on entrepreneurship. I'm fortunate enough, I think I've been doing it for about 10 years now, to go along each year to King's School and be a judge in their Dragon's Den for the end of their entrepreneurship unit. And it is just absolutely incredible to contrast that with what we had when I was at school. I think the only thing that I remember like pre-university was a computer game where you were the owner of a pizza shop. And I don't recall what the game was called, but it stuck with me ever since, and you had a budget and you had to decide what proportion of the budget you would spend on signs up and down the highway to advertise the pizza shop. And I thought that was fascinating, going again and again, trying it with different inputs. How much do I really need to spend on marketing to grow? If I overspend, then suddenly I've got nothing left. I can't pay the wages. That was cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm dwelling on it because we're at a point in time where a lot of people are questioning the value of a university degree now, the price that's involved, especially in the United States, but even in New Zealand, you're talking kind of 50,000+ of debt that you're going to accumulate. You've got that 3 to 4 years of experience that you're sacrificing out in the workforce. And of course, now everything's moving so rapidly, AI, etc., is sitting in this lecture style environment with the odd practical project tacked on the outside, and only a modicum of interaction with other humans is that of more value than going out into the workforce. And I received a phone call maybe 3 or 4 nights ago from a good friend's 12-year-old daughter who's just got that entrepreneurial flair just so strong. She's selling raffle tickets for the school. Totally of her own gumption. There's a prize that if they sell the most tickets, and she's clearly going to win this thing. Total hustler through and through. Loved her pitch. She did social pressure on me. Adam's bought some and Tom's bought some, and you got to get involved in this thing. And
Love it.
Yeah, it was amazing. And so I think about the value of doing that thing and other things, more than going off and sitting in a lecture hall these days. And do you have any thoughts on that?
I think universities are in real trouble. And I've thought that for a number of years. I remember when Coursera launched, and I jumped in straight away and did their inaugural course, which was on machine learning. And I remember thinking, this is just so much higher quality than many of the courses that I did at university. And it's topical. This is literally the leading edge or the bleeding edge of this technology.
Yeah.
And it's coming out immediately in real time, and it's being taught by the guy who's developing it. How do you compete with that?
So hard, man. Like, universities must be one of the most difficult businesses to be in, because to produce a new product, it's almost like car design. So there's the kind of 5 to 7 years between the conception to an actual product being out in the hands of the consumer. They work against themselves, and they take a long time to tool up anyway. They take a year to think about it, a year to talk about it, a year to design it, and then they start to get people into that program, and then it takes 3 to 4 years to get them through that program. So 5, 6, 7 years to getting a new product out in the marketplace. So antiquated, so slow, in an environment of learning which is not geared around how most people want to learn, nor in a way that kind of suits learning styles as well. So I think the same thing. So you left university in 2004. Entertains had several hundred clients at around about that stage. When did you entertain the notion of selling, or when did someone approach you with the idea of selling that business?
I was approached in 2003, I think it was, and ended up having that conversation for a number of months, and it made sense. And primarily because my focus had shifted from being really interested in building this web infrastructure for other people to being much more interested in building the websites for other people. And so that was a point where I was really starting to think about Nerds Inc. and the next steps, which was an agency. And there was an opportunity to exit that web hosting space. So that's what I did.
To whom? And do you remember the kind of terms of the deal as much as you can share?
I can remember the number. The number was $87,000.
Okay, amazing.
And I remember that number because I've thought about it quite a number of times since and thought, wow, what would have happened if I invested $87,000 into a house deposit in Auckland?
Or Amazon stock.
Or Apple or Google or whatever, Yahoo, whatever it might have been. But ultimately, no, that was the seed money for starting the agency.
Yeah.
And I was super happy to be doing that.
Hi, it's Josh. Thanks for listening to the show. When founders talk about the dream exit, they're really talking about freedom. Freedom to choose how to use their time and to decide what comes next. As a client of JB Ware in New Zealand, I know this is what sets them apart. They help entrepreneurs and leaders turn success into significance. A great exit isn't just about the commas in your bank account. It's about what those commas allow you to create. Two Commas is proudly partnered with JB Ware, helping founders by putting their wealth to work for generations.
So your first exit, and you would have been probably, 22, 23 years old at that sort of stage?
24.
24, okay. I've got an expression which I don't think I've shared with you before, which is never lament the gains you didn't make.
I like it.
Yeah, because it's so easy to beat yourself up for things, investment opportunities that you miss along the way, rather than acknowledging that there's some great decisions you make and some really, really terrible decisions you make. But looking back upon what you know now from building Nerds and then that becoming Eventfinda, do you think that there would have been a world that holding on to Entertains and capitalising on everyone going onto the internet, because it was still relatively early days in New Zealand, we hadn't had saturation, I would have guessed would have been, web hosting, you're probably talking 15 to 20% of the market in those days, just a bit of a wet finger in the air. Do you ever wonder what if I'd held on to that business and grown that into something?
No, not at all. I didn't have a passion for it anymore.
Right.
And so I was looking for new opportunities for really primarily driven by that.
Yeah.
I had always followed from a technical perspective, what I was interested in, and that had run its course.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you were developing on Ruby on Rails, but you've glossed over the name Nerds, which was the name of that business, developing customized websites, which I love, by the way. It's a really cool name. You were punching above your weight. So Lion Nathan, Auckland Council, etc. So those are big brands. How did you win customers of that ilk?
Yeah. So again, that was it wasn't me going out there in an ill-fitting suit and pitching to blue chip clients. It was finding partners who would bring those clients to us. And so we had an office on Hobson Street. We had an agency downstairs from us. I had worked with another agency that was in Newton, and it was the agencies that had those clients and in many cases had actually pitched the concepts and then thought, hang on, how are we going to do this? And I developed a bit of a reputation, a bit of a name for myself in being able to deliver these things that were kind of novel and really interesting. And it wasn't just the agencies. There were some of the suppliers in that space as well.
Entertains, sole-founded. Your second business you went into with a co-founder who quickly exited the business. And then you decided to kind of pivot, merge the Nerds business into the entertainment space. Now, it wasn't Eventfinda to start with. It was Eventfinda, but with an ER to start with.
It was Eventfinda with an ER. That wasn't my decision. So, in fact, this is a really interesting segue from the previous part of the conversation, because Michael Turner came and knocked on my door and said, I've got this idea. He'd gone to DPS and said, I probably want to start taking some credit card payments online at some point. And they said, go and talk to James. So he did. And it was kind of this perfect confluence of things for me, because I had built, I don't even know how many different e-commerce and database-driven websites. I had one foot firmly in the entertainment space with the touring and DJing. Absolutely loved events, and had some experience in these particular areas that Michael thought that he would need. So Eventfinda is one of those names, and I think, sometimes you just have names that are so perfect. It's exactly what it says on the tin is what you do. And Michael's girlfriend at the time, Michelle, had come up with that name randomly when they were brainstorming. And it was just so perfect. So I mentioned that these event guides online were fragmented. There were over 200 of them.
In New Zealand?
In New Zealand.
Whoa.
Yeah. So almost every city council had started, and regional council had started putting events online.
Yeah.
There were just about any vertical you can imagine had a guide, whether that's mountain biking or dance parties or whatever it might be. And so we saw that as a huge opportunity. So we focused on building the processes, the online forms that would allow the event stakeholders to list their content super easily. So this is an audience that not everyone was super familiar with the web. Not everyone had bought a plane ticket online. Not everyone had bought anything online. So we thought, we've got to make this as absolutely simple as we possibly can. And there was this book that was quite popular at the time by Steve Krug called Don't Make Me Think.
Okay.
And that was our Bible.
Right.
We were just super focused on how do we make this as accessible as we can.
Is it like heuristics and user-centered design, that sort of thinking?
It's about making sure that it is just as intuitive as it possibly can be.
Yeah, I mean, that's still relevant today, right?
100%. One of those fundamentals. And so then we walk up and down High Street, and I don't know if you remember back then, but you'd walk into a clothing shop or shoe shop, and you'd have these stacks of cards outside.
Everywhere, flyers everywhere.
That's it. And so we'd pick up all the flyers, and we'd go back and we'd load up those events on the website. And then we'd get hold of the promoters and say, we don't have your next events listed on the website, but there's people on Eventfinda that are looking for it. Why don't you list it and we can help you?
Sounds like it was a community service though. So all of those things are wonderful, but I'm not hearing money kind of flowing around the place here. So how did that work in the early days?
Well, we became a publisher.
Yeah, okay.
And so we were selling rectangles around the outside of the pages.
Yep, banner advertising.
And that was going pretty well. The problem was we weren't far into it. We were probably about 6 months into 2006 when we started hearing that there was a competing website coming. And the New Zealand government had previously, and this is the Labour government, Helen Clark's Labour government, had said that they were going to be building a portal for the cultural sector online, and it was going to be called NZ Live. And we thought, well, that sounds pretty good. New Zealand needs a portal for the cultural sector, and it was going to advertise and promote the big events that were happening around New Zealand to an offshore audience in particular, and encourage international tourism and all those sorts of good things. But as it got closer to their launch date, we started hearing that actually it was probably going to be more like a copy of Eventfinda. And I say copy, but what we'd done wasn't hugely novel. There were other websites out there that were capturing event information in similar ways, and then building a social system around it as we had, and allowing people to comment, provide feedback, things like that. But it was still pretty disconcerting to hear that there was a website coming that was essentially feature for feature identical to what we were doing. So we jumped on a plane and we went down to Wellington, and we had a chat with the team behind it. And we said, look, we've built this website. We already have a lot of content. We've got quite a good consumer audience, and the stats are looking really great. We've built an API on it because we're starting to find syndication partners. And we had been going around getting third-party organizations hooked up so that they could display their event listings or event listings for a category or a region on their own websites. And we said, we'll give you the content. And you're not going to have to worry about competing with us and capturing all this information and engaging the event stakeholders. And they said, no, we're good. We've got a budget for it. We have the money allocated. Sorry, chaps, this is what we're doing.
This is central government representatives, or was this like an independent digital agency that you were talking to?
Central government.
Yeah, okay.
They had their own agency.
Yeah. What did you make that mean? So you were still relatively young and still kind of finding your way in business, despite having had these couple of things beforehand. But what did you make that mean at the time?
It was terrifying.
Yeah.
It was existential.
Yes.
Right? Both Michael and I had poured all of the savings that we had into this. The publishing certainly wasn't paying enough that we, that we'd consider it even a full-time wage. And what this meant was that the organizations that we'd been talking to and convincing them to load their content, the ballet, the opera, et cetera, were probably going to now start to have their arms twisted to put that content somewhere else. And the syndication partners and prospective syndication partners we've been talking to, and I remember we were talking to newzealand.com through this process. Suddenly the attitude was changing a little bit, and it was, well, actually, maybe we've got to do a syndication deal with NZ Live instead. So it was really troubling. We didn't know what that meant for us, but we were pretty determined to fight. Mm. And so that's exactly what we did. They launched on, I think it was September the 11th, 2006.
Okay.
So it was about 9 months after we launched. And every single day from then, we were looking at the stats. It was, we were in Google Analytics. How many people are coming in? What type of people are they? How do we segment them? How many pages per visit are they looking at? How do we increase engagement? How do we increase loyalty and having those people come back? We were looking at Nielsen net ratings, which at the time, as a publisher, we were using to sell advertising. But NZ Live was in there as well, so we could see exactly how much traffic they were getting, how many page views were they doing. And virtually every single day for the next few years, we managed to beat those KPIs that they had. And we kind of used that as our North Star. But
that's an interesting point. I'm just going to dwell on that for a second. I was just listening to a biography of John D. Rockefeller recently. He was the founder of Standard Oil in the 1800s, and he invented a whole bunch of different methodologies, not just trading of the platform, but distribution and retail. And he dominated that industry for a very long time with some fairly aggressive methodologies, as were okay back in those days, seemingly. And one of the points that was made early on in this biography is that he was aware of what was going on around him, but he was feverishly focused on his path that he was very clear on, and always strategizing, 5, 8, 10 years out in advance from his own frame of reference, with a nod to what was going on with competition. So given that you were daily looking at what the competition was doing, do you think that had a positive effect on how you were performing, or did it distract you from achieving the objectives that you wanted to achieve?
No, I think it had a hugely positive impact on us. Okay. Because we were just, it made us focus on what the real questions were. And the real questions were, how much content can we get and all user-generated content from the industry. And how can we build the best audience for that content that we possibly can? And so we were super focused on how do we provide an experience for every single one of those prospective event goers that gives them the content that they want straight away, that causes them to come back, that makes them want to sign up for our newsletter, all of those things.
Yeah, okay.
And then on the back end as well, things like our API, how do we create the best developer experience so that, if we're not this government department that's going out and saying we're the New Zealand National Events Calendar, how do we just make it so easy for people to say yes?
I'm imagining the government was probably very well funded from taxpayer money, and so they were
millions of dollars.
Yeah, millions of dollars. Yeah, great. And so you famously, for a period of time, lived on 2-minute noodles during your first business. So you've always had quite a cost-conscious mentality around things. So to what extent do you think that played out in your ability to compete and win with an incredibly well-funded agency?
It was my first real lesson, I think, that money is not the be-all and end-all.
Yeah, tell me more.
The agency that they engaged was, I'm sure, very good and had good credentials, but they were producing a product using a waterfall methodology where they were providing, they were building specifications on wireframes, and then they would build the designs around the wireframes, and those wireframes had been built on functional requirements that were reasonably static. And to contrast that with us, we were just looking every day at those visitor behavior numbers, and almost every day we were changing the system to improve those numbers. So it was probably an early example of agile versus traditional waterfall.
Yeah. For those that don't know, do you just want to quickly explain the differences beyond what you've already said between agile versus waterfall? It's a very interesting project methodology contrast.
Yeah. So waterfall is this traditional model where you start off with the client requirements, and that means that the client has to know what their requirements are. And that's really the fundamental underpinning of the whole methodology.
Dangerous assumption.
And if the client does know exactly what their requirements are, and sometimes they do, if you're building an automobile, then you should probably know what those requirements are up front. But software is different. Software, you don't necessarily know what the end outcome is at the beginning. And if you treat it as an experimental process where you have a hypothesis and you're building to test that hypothesis as quickly as possible and then adjusting, that's where Agile comes in. And so with Agile, you're saying, what's the minimum viable version of this that we can build and put out to get that customer feedback and then to decide what the next iteration is going to be? And in this case, it was a perfect example of how that methodology just allows you to outmaneuver the competition.
Yeah. You mentioned the automobile. My mind immediately goes to Henry Ford and his famous comment, which was that if I asked my customers what they wanted at that time, they would have said a faster horse. And he famously went out and productionized the automotive, the vehicle. So
and they can have any color they want as long as it's black.
Black, yeah. Many Henry Fordisms. So those, you were competing and winning with this, government agency, the government. And so what's happened to that business now? And when did you guys decide that you were going to kind of slightly deviate from the path of being an event registration, like an event searching kind of site?
Yeah, there were a couple of events that happened in between those, before that pivot. So one thing that happened was that our publisher revenue, and what we had hoped would be event stakeholder revenue, as we'd expected we'd be able to start charging the event owners to put on, to list the events on Eventfinda. We couldn't do that. Once NZ Live launched and it was free, that commercial plan sort of went out the window. And so while I was busy building these technical systems and the APIs and the product functionality, Michael was out looking for investment to keep us going. And he was an incredible salesperson when it came to product, but also especially getting investment in and selling the vision of what Eventfinda could be and what it was even at that point. I've never met anyone who could articulate that in the way that he could. Since been called by one of our investors the reality distortion field.
Steve Jobs.
But I think that's, yes, exactly, Steve Jobs. And I think that's so important in the early days of being a startup. And I didn't have that skill set. So thankfully, Michael was incredibly good at it. And we went and talked to all of the major media companies, and APN decided that they were interested in investing in Eventfinda. And so at the end of 2007, they took a 50% stake in the business. That was great. I spent 3 months in the APN offices on Albert Street, and at that stage got a bit of a sense of what being in a really traditional corporate was like.
Did you like it?
I did not. I decided that was not for me. But it was only 3 months, and then we found our own office space and we started to build a team. I think
what didn't you like about it? What was about the corporate that put you off?
There were a number of rules, and and I'm sure those rules were with good reason, but there were it was almost I wouldn't say they would have smothered us, because they were conscious of not doing that. But one example that I'll share was we were getting a lot of user generated content on the website, and a lot of photos were being put up, as you'd expect, it's event content. And so one of the things that the APN team was terrified of was, well, what's the licensing for these images? We don't put anything up on our website, and we don't print anything unless we've got the license for it. And we have these subscriptions with Getty, and we pay thousands of dollars or tens of thousands a year for these subscriptions. How's Eventfinda going to prove that all of these images that are being uploaded, hundreds a day, thousands, a week, are all licensed properly? And we're going to get lawsuits from photographers. And I said, why don't we worry about that when it happens? Mm-hmm. Which is ultimately what we ended up doing. But it was those sorts of conversations, and you would have those conversations every day. And so I spent a few months working there, and unfortunately, that was an interesting time cyclically for markets, and we were heading pretty much, we didn't realize it at the time, but we were heading pretty much straight into the global financial crisis. And the very first thing that most organizations did in response to the tightening that was required in the GFC was put a line straight through their marketing budget, anything external anyway. And so we were having really difficult conversations around how we balanced the books, and we had incredibly difficult and distressing conversations with team members that we had to say goodbye to. So that was really, really tough. We did manage to get through, but we weren't able to rely on NZME's checkbook to help us out.
Hey, legend. Thanks for your ears. I really appreciate you listening to the show. Everything improves through feedback. I'd be really grateful if you could head to my website, joshcomrie.com, just click on the podcast link and fill out a 2-minute survey, which will give me the insights around the things that you're enjoying about the show and where you would like us to go more into the future. It'll take less than 2 minutes. I'd be really grateful. And you'll also receive some free resources should you share your email address with us. Thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of the show.
While the Labour government and Helen Clark was the Minister for Culture and Heritage.
Yeah, that's right.
Had been the champion of this NZ Live website. We thought, well, actually, there's going to be perhaps less of an appetite to duplicate the efforts of the private sector under the new regime. And so we made quite a bit of noise, and we reached out to our MPs and all of that sort of thing. And unfortunately, the message back was a resounding, not our problem, it's a legacy issue. And so I came up with this idea for a website, and it was called ynzlive.com. And at the very top of it was this counter, and every second the counter ticked up to show how many dollars had been spent so far. And down the sides of it were all of the comments that we'd had from the various commentators who had said, this is absolutely crazy. Why are we allowing this to continue? And there was this new social website called Twitter. And Twitter had an API. And so, well, I know how to use APIs. So I created a Twitter handle for the YNZ Live site and set up a bot to follow everyone in New Zealand on Twitter. And people would see this follow request come in, and they think, oh, I'll follow that, and I'll go and have a quick squiz at the website. Mm-hmm. And within a fairly short space of time, we were the second most followed New Zealand Twitter account.
I didn't know this.
Next thing you know, we're getting an invitation to appear on TV on Breakfast. And Alison Mao was interviewing Michael and said, tell us about how this is being allowed to continue. And he shared all of the stats and the data and the budgets. And they said, well, we've invited the minister, it's Chris Finlayson, to appear and defend this use of taxpayer funds for nzlive.com. And Chris has said, well, this is just something from the previous government. We don't really know much about that. And my recollection is that Alison Mao then brought up the questions that Chris had asked in question time in opposition about why the Labour government was spending so much money on nzlive.com.
Stop it.
So that was a bit of a coup for us. And then we got an invitation then to come down to Wellington and have a chat and figure out how we can find a way forward amicably. And we did that. We provided all of the information that we could about Eventfinda and what we'd been doing. There was an inquiry launched, and the government CIO produced a report, and he interviewed a whole lot of industry stakeholders and events promoters and other events guides. And his recommendation at the end of all of that was, guys, you need to shut this down. Mm-hmm. Suggest that you transfer the website and the database to Eventfinda, and that's what they did.
Yeah. Looking back on it now, I mean, you were grappling for your survival as a business, and you were threatened by an incredibly well-funded competitor who was seemingly not listening to the pragmatic rationalism about, why are we doing this, against each other here when we could work together. But looking back on it now and the response that you made, what's the kind of lesson that you took away from that?
I think the main lesson is that you're never beaten until you're beaten. I remember coming away from that first meeting in Wellington and Michael and I going and getting a beer on Courtney Place, and we were despondent, and there was a real question between us as to how far do we want to keep pushing this.
Yeah.
But we had the conversation right then and there, which was, all right, well, are we going to give this our absolute best shot? And we decided, we would do that.
Yeah.
And it would have been so easy to give up at that point. And the odds were absolutely against us. Mm. But, you're never beaten until you're beaten.
Yeah. That resilience thing, I completely agree with that. So your main investor, being APN, didn't have the funds to carry you forward. Your main competitor had essentially said, here's our business. Wonderful, thank you. There was no money that changed hands, by the way?
No.
Yeah, okay, great. So you had the run of the market at that stage, but it wasn't enough because then you decided to get into ticketing.
Yeah, well, the GFC had really changed the marketing landscape, and there were technological changes that were happening at the same time. So we had gone from being able to sell a really targeted position on Eventfinda. You might say, okay, we only want to get this message in front of people who are interested in snow sports in Central Otago, and we could give you that audience. And we could charge a reasonable amount for that. We had, in some cases, we had campaigns that were going live at $80+ CPM.
Wow.
But there were new technologies emerging, and Google was pushing that, but there were programmatic options that were starting to pop up, and the CPM rates that were coming out were much more like $2 CPM. And so it became very difficult to compete. And so we were thinking, right, what do we do? So we'd already built an API, so we started charging for syndication for full access to that API. We got into licensing, and we took the whole platform, and we found an Austrian licensee who wanted an events guide, and so they were keen to translate it into German, and we helped them to do that. And that's a client who's still up and running today in Vorarlberg. But it still wasn't enough. And so we're thinking, what else can we possibly do? And we still had these systems that were so much easier to use for event stakeholders than any of the other online systems that they were using. And they said to us, would you consider getting into ticketing? And I thought, well, ticketing is a bit like selling anything else. It's an e-commerce website. I've built lots of e-commerce websites. How hard can it be to sell tickets? And I think that healthy dose of naivety is absolutely essential.
Yes.
There's absolutely, if I knew what I know now about the complexities of ticketing, we would not have done it.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, we wouldn't have got into the space.
It's pre-cloud computing, so you needed to have your own servers. And my understanding of the ticketing space is that you do nothing, then you release a big show or an event, and then you've got tens of thousands of people that are endeavoring to execute a transaction. So, of course, your load volume goes through the roof. Is that kind of the crux of the problem?
That's the beginning of the problem. And then the follow-up to the problem is you're on the front page of the paper. You've got promoters calling and screaming at you, sometimes from New Zealand, sometimes from overseas. And it's a really, really difficult technical challenge.
Mm-hmm.
There's huge commercial challenges in the space as well that we can get to, but technically it is an incredibly challenging space to be in. Even with cloud computing and elastic demand, elastic capacity, it is challenging. And back in those days, of course, we had a rack of equipment in the Adele Street data center, and you've only got so many servers, and the servers can only support so many people at once. To the time that it took to, so now we can increase our server capacity quite quickly, still not quickly enough, but, you can have a new server online within 3 or 4 minutes.
Yeah.
Back then it was, if you were lucky, 3 or 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
You had to order the server, and then the server had to come in, and maybe the server wasn't in New Zealand, and then it had to arrive, and then you had to set it up, and setting it up took a week, and then you had to get it into the data center, and then you had to hook it up to your load balancers and all that sort of thing. So it was a very, very different technical scenario to what we have today. But that naivety is a great thing because it does let you take the first step. And the first steps were really good for us. We sold our first ticket in April 2009 to a Phoenix Foundation gig at Toto, I think it was, in Monte Cristo room. And I remember standing outside the door of the venue with our ticket scanner, and our scanner in those days was a Motorola Symbol MC75 mobile computing platform. We had to program it in Windows. I can't remember if it was .NET or pre.NET, but it was tricky. There are a lot of these problems that have been solved today, like the ability to scan a barcode with your phone. We take it for granted. Back then, that capability didn't exist. You were relying on laser devices and being able to either use off-the-shelf hardware or even customized hardware where you've bought a platform and then you've bought a sled or some other hardware device that it fits into that can, for example, do the imaging or the laser scanning. And so that was hard work.
Yeah. So at the beginning of this conversation, you mentioned that there were well-entrenched, quite powerful competitors who you were taking market share from. There might have been some expansion along the way, especially post-GFC when people started to go out and invest in, buy concert tickets and so on again. Yeah. But on what basis were you able to compete and win against these really powerful competitors?
So I just reiterate, we had no idea what we were doing.
Right.
So we thought that if we didn't charge a booking fee or we capped a booking fee at $1, that we could take the entire market.
People would care about that, right?
People would care about it, absolutely. People are really concerned about that dollar. People are always complaining about booking fees. They're always complaining about ticketing companies. So it's going to be super easy for us to win this market by building a simple system that's easy to use that either doesn't charge them anything or charges them very little, and will charge the promoter $1 and they'll be happy to pay that. So we were completely wrong on almost all of those fronts. Didn't understand. There were so many things that we were completely naive about how the industry worked. And it turns out the ticketing industry really is run by the venues because the venues generally have a monopoly. There's usually one arena in town, there's one stadium in town. Some of the bigger centres might have more than one, but they are essentially, for the most part, a monopoly. And so they can choose the commercial suppliers that they have for that venue. They can choose their caterer, their security team, and of course they can choose the ticketing company. And we had no idea. We were very, very fortunate to attract and hire someone for our business who had worked in Ticketek for 10 years, had worked with World Cup on ticketing with IMG. So that was Anna. She came on board and we told her that we had a ticketing system, and she came along with us to the first pitch to a pretty decent-sized venue. and was very quiet. And then in the car park afterwards said, "Is that the ticketing system?" But she was amazing, and she really helped steer the product direction from that point in terms of helping us to understand even just the terminology that was used in that space.
What did she join you guys as a pivoting business that was endeavouring to take on super well-funded, super powerful, as we've talked about, incumbents? So why did she come and join little old Eventfinda?
Well, I think we told a good story.
Right.
And I think Anna had a healthy dose of naivety as well. That's, it's useful for anyone coming into those sort of things, just like starting a new venture.
Yeah.
But I think she was excited by the prospect of starting something new and something that could potentially disrupt an existing industry.
Yeah. It's not often enough talked about, but the power of a key hire early on in your journey or early on in a pivot can be like just absolutely massively game-changing for your business. It's quite difficult to do, though, to execute in practicality, because there's got to be something that's happened for that person to make it like a reasonable proposition for them to take on the risk, because the risk actually becomes more about their personal employment risk, their brand risk, than it does about your employee risk, which is, spread across a bunch of other people. And this could be a game-changing thing. So well done.
Well, look, 100%. And I talk about this all the time, because there is nothing great that you can do without a great team.
Yeah.
I really honestly believe that. And, one of the things that they say is, you should ask yourself the question of, would I enthusiastically rehire every person on the team? And for me, that has been something that's been in the back of my mind since day one, right through to now. And, I'm incredibly proud to say that every single person on our team I would enthusiastically rehire in a heartbeat. Like, they are just absolutely incredible individuals, and the way that they work together as a team is absolutely amazing. We were really fortunate to bring Anna on when we did at the beginning of that journey. We were also really fortunate with our first hire, who was Bob Carlton, who was the guy with a little bit of grey hair who'd worked in the entertainment industry in Los Angeles for decades. And was really the grown-up in the room, as these two guys were building this entertainment technology startup, and just kind of helping us to stay focused on what was important and what was important for the market, and also to be that person that the people we were talking to could talk to if they wanted to. So, and it's the same in sales. There's always going to be different people who resonate well with different personalities. I find it really helps to have a fairly diverse team in that respect. So no matter who you're talking to, and even if it's multiple stakeholders, different stakeholders at the same client, having different people in your team who can talk to them, who understand them, who are going to have empathy for them, and vice versa.
I've long thought that as a CEO, there's a couple of things that you need to excel at to have a great business. If you're a competent recruiter, you rely upon luck to build a great team. If you're a great recruiter, then you reduce the element of luck. You're still going to get it wrong sometimes, but the likelihood of you having an exceptional team and making an exceptional product and winning in a difficult market is like multiplied by some degree. The other skill I think that every CEO needs to have in buckets is sales or influence capability. And to miss either of those things means that you're probably going to be up against so many different things. But for you, is there like a methodology or a special approach that you've got around recruitment and bringing on incredible team members?
So I wouldn't consider myself great at this at all. I would say there's another core competency of a CEO, which is the drive and the ability to remove people on the team who are brought in who don't fit. And so I did have to lean on that in the early days. And those are difficult conversations to have and difficult processes to work through. But I think they're critically important.
Yeah, I totally agree.
In terms of the way that I bring people on, I have the conversations with them, absolutely ask the behavioral questions, all of those sorts of things. Tick those sort of boxes and follow the process, but it's bringing those people into the team, having other people in the team that you trust, spend time with them, getting a diverse set of opinions around the table. But be the first to admit you get this wrong 50% of the time, or we have got this wrong probably approaching 50% of the time.
I think that ratio probably sounds about right. I've got a method that I use, and it still serves me incredibly well to today. I'll talk about one of these two things. And we talked before about resilience as being just a critical aspect of success for a person. And resilience is generated through some form of hardship in your background. You can't watch a YouTube video or read a harrowing account of, Scott's Antarctic expedition and then become a stronger, more resilient person. You've got to go and do something hard, or unfortunately have something hard done to you, typically when you were younger. And so the thing that I do is that I build trust and empathy over the course of the conversation with people, and I get them relaxed enough so that they're away from that, fight or flight adrenaline kind of buzz that happens early on in an interview. So it's at the back end of probably the first conversation that I'm having with them. And then I say, look, I want to talk about something that's really important to me for this business and for this role. And it's the ability to survive in difficult times, because there's going to be some moments that you're not going to know what you're doing, or they're going to be asked to do something that might be quite challenging for you to do. And I say, you're prepared to talk about that? Yes, they are. And then I share an experience from my background, which is some of the hardship that I've experienced. And I say, I'm going to share something with you, and then I'd like you to reciprocate, so you've got time to think about what this thing could be. Take as long as you need, go into as much detail as you want, and I want them to have that moment. And I've had several people at a conversation where either one of us is kind of getting a bit of a tear up about this, this hard thing that they're sharing with me. So I want to know that they've had to stare something unbelievably difficult in the face and then overcome that thing. Because the consequence is, if they haven't done that, and then you ask them, or they come across that really, really hard thing to do, and startups are riddled with hard things to do. I mean, there's a book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things, because the whole business of a startup is a hard thing. And if they come across that first hurdle, and if they can't make it over, they're going to collapse or walk around the outside. And then you go, oh God, I'm back to that place. If that's one of the 50% that didn't work out, and I have to put on the big boy pants and performance manage them, or, terminate contract, or whatever it might be. And so that's the thing that I go looking for. Is there any trick that you have in interviewing? You talked about behavioral, et cetera, kind of questions. Is there anything?
Yeah, so I am a fan. I've heard you talk about it before on the podcast of top grading.
Yes.
Great methodology. And I think coming into those processes and understanding that you're going to get it wrong a pretty significant proportion of the time. So what are all of the things that you can do that are just going to chip away at that proportion and give you as much of an advantage in that process as you can?
Yes.
Are great. And the top grading methodology does really dig into those behavioral questions, the scenarios. What exactly have you been through? What was the position you were in? What was the challenge? How did you overcome it? What was the detail behind that? Yes. And I think that's really super important, because especially if you're hiring for sales, for example, I mean, you should walk away from a sales interview feeling like this is the absolutely perfect person for the job. If not, well, I'm not sure why they're applying for a sales role. So it's figuring out, how do you get past that veneer? How do you really dig down into that person's psyche and understand, are they going to be able to do the role? Are they going to fit in well with the team?
Yes.
As you say, they're going to be able to overcome the challenges, because we're hiring for sales at the moment. You're going to get knocked back 80, 90% of the time.
Literally.
Yeah.
And it's not about you, it's your product.
That's it. That's it. Or it's the timing, or it's the client, or it's the materials aren't quite right. And, especially as you go into new markets, have you got all of that sales support function working the way it should do? So, there's a huge amount of resilience that needs to be involved.
Yeah. I reckon I've probably interviewed approaching certainly more than 250, possibly as many as 500 sales-oriented people through leading big sales teams and having an executive search practice where that was a part of what I did, was to appoint senior, IT income-generating salespeople. So I interviewed hundreds, literally, of these people. And my hypothesis is, for a lot of these folk, their single best performance as a salesperson is the interview.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree.
You'll go through it right now. So you mentioned that you think that your onboarding might be special. Tell us about what you do to ensure that because there's two aspects to it, right? There's the ability to make sure that you're putting them through their paces as quickly as is reasonable for that person, but they're also integrating with the team, becoming aware of what the expectations of the business are, how do I do the job around here? How do I excel? That sort of thing. So what do you do?
Yeah, for us, it's not so much the onboarding, it's part of the recruitment process. So it's bringing them in and putting them into situations with other team members where those people also have a chance to assess what they're going to be like working with them day to day.
Like a trust fall in the interview?
So that's one way of looking at it. And it's not like you're sitting across the table from 4 or 5 people. It's actually breaking it up a little bit. And so, it might be that you're coming in, you're talking to me, then you're spending a little bit of time with 2 others on the team. And actually then you're going out for lunch and you might be having a beer or a glass of wine with another couple of people. Yeah. And so they're getting a chance to see that person in a few different contexts, giving them an opportunity to let their guard down, really helping the team members to understand and visualize how is this person going to perform, how are they going to be part of the culture, what are the red flags potentially that we need to watch out for.
Yeah. I mean, I've long believed that there's no kind of perfect person for any role or any organization. It's a case of going, is this the right person for where we're at right now and the next kind of 2 to 3 years? That's about as much visibility as any of us are going to be able to have into the future. And the way that they deal with issues, problems, the resolution that they have, is that appropriate for us as a team? Are they enough like us as an individual that we're going to get on well? And is there something special they can bring to the team? Those are probably, 3 or 4 of the key things that I tend to look for in individuals.
Yeah, 100%. And we have our own objectives for growth as an organisation. We've got our objectives for growth as an individual. One of the questions in the back of our mind is going to be, is this person going to be able to grow with us as we go? And we've been incredibly fortunate to attract people who have grown phenomenally through the time that they've been with us. And it's one of the things I think that is often surprising when people come into Eventfinda is, actually, what's the tenure of the people who are on the team? And I think tenure speaks volumes or can speak volumes for culture. It can also say that you don't move people on when they need to go. But, we have a designer, Joe, who's been with us for 15 years. Anna's now been with us for 13 years. Our operations manager, Emily's been with us for 8 years. These are numbers that really are far beyond the usual tenure for businesses in our space and for technology or entertainment companies. Technology is infamous for being a sort of 18-month turnaround and then move on to the next thing. So it's one thing I'm incredibly proud of is the culture that we've developed that's meant that people feel that that's a place for them to stay.
Yeah. So you were going out and winning these smaller and ever-increasing in scale venues. You had a great team that was burgeoning in the background, but you needed to go and get some extra money at some stage. You had APN as an investor. They weren't writing any checks anymore, so you had to go out and find some other investors. Tell us about that journey.
Yeah, so where that started was we thought, let's take the Eventfinda platform that we've built in New Zealand and launch it into another market. So which market will we choose? Well, Australia is the obvious choice. And so we launched there, I think it was in 2010 or 2011, and the numbers in Australia were starting to look really good, obviously a much bigger population. We'd started a little bit later, so we were on the back foot a little bit compared to some of the established event guides. But our numbers in terms of unique browsers that were coming in and the number of pages that they were looking at were really moving in the right direction. And so we thought, well, why don't we try and find a licensee for Australia? And so we went over there and we did that. We found a licensee. His name was Mark. He had a previous technology and agency business, and he took on Eventfinda Australia. And we thought, okay, what are we going to do next? Well, we've done it. What we thought we had done a pretty good job in New Zealand. The growth in Australia was incredibly promising. So what's the obvious next step? Well, we'll go into the States, right? We'll take over the States. We'll become the national events guide for
this. Is still a hint of naivety that's going on.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. So we thought, well, why don't we, as well as licensing Eventfinda in Australia, we'll raise capital. And so Mark invested in the wider business, and we took on 2 or 3 other investors, and we raised what we thought was pretty significant funding. What we probably didn't do was listen to the American on our team who said, it's a pretty big place over there, or some of the advisors that we took on who said, maybe you want to focus just a little bit. No, we thought, hey, if we can do Australia, we can do the US. And so we brought on a content team, and who were in our office in Parnell, who were mapping out the US, all of the towns, country, counties, venues, and we were trying to engage an audience over there, engage the event stakeholders. And it was wildly, phenomenally unsuccessful. We learned exactly what not to do, which funnily enough was what people had been telling us we probably shouldn't do. And we just spread ourselves way too thin.
Mm. So it was a lack of focus. If there was a crux of the problem, it was a lack of focus.
It was an inability to get critical mass in any one place. In hindsight, what we should have done was say, we're going to pick a city, and we're potentially even going to pick some verticals within that city. And we should have done what the other events guides that we had taken business from had done. I'm thinking about the websites that catered to dance music or mountain biking or taupo. And if we had done that in the States and we'd said, okay, we're gonna do rock in Portland, that's a big enough audience, and we just didn't understand that. The scale is so phenomenally different,
mind-boggling,
to what we see in New Zealand or even what we were seeing in Australia.
Yeah,
the competition is far more intense over there.
And there's this distraction that we have about thinking that they lead in a whole lot of fronts around, technology and consumer behavior. And then you come across this banking system where they still literally today write checks to each other. They literally write a check and then sign it, and then that person takes it to the bank. And so there's this incredible, advance and deployment of technology in some sectors, which makes your head spin. And then others are just stuck back in the days of literally passing around bits of paper that represent currency. The thing that I'm always interested in with the States is that whenever everyone's talking about doing it, I talk about focus and getting a micro version of the States that might represent what could be your step change from the original market, so you can leverage out into different regions. I think about America as being 80 different markets, thereabouts, and that sort of quantum. And people just don't have that perspective. And each one of those is 2, 3, 4 times the size of New Zealand.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt that it's just orders of magnitude beyond what we're used to, and we have some trouble thinking about it in those terms. And so we realized that we were spending the money and we weren't getting much traction at all, and so we started going up and down Sandhill Road and trying to raise some more money. But meanwhile, our burn rate was pretty phenomenal, and we would talk to potential investors and they'd say, look, we love this product and we can really see the potential. We just need to see a little bit more traction. And of course, let us know as soon as you've got a lead on this and we'll potentially come in for that round. Well, that was exactly the same message from virtually every fund that we spoke to.
It's a veiled no for those that are unfamiliar.
And we didn't understand that either, right? We didn't understand that was a no. And so, we kept at it for far too long and we spent far too much money. So that was probably, I say a missed opportunity, but maybe it isn't. If we had executed that perfectly, we may still not have been able to do it. But that was how we ended up bringing up more investors, and it was how APN managed to exit their investment.
Okay, it's secondaries, right?
Yeah, exactly. So they were selling the shares that they held, and we were issuing new shares. So yeah, that's how we ended up with the investor group that we really had right through to just recently.
Yeah. And looking back upon that investment moment, were there any kind of conditions or any approaches that they had as a group that you look back and you go, oh, I wish we hadn't done that? Or were you kind of aligned the whole journey?
I think we were pretty much aligned the whole journey. There were some, and we did a number of rounds through that period, and there were some rounds that were done at incredibly low valuations just to really make sure that everyone participated. But I think in general, the investors were really aligned with what we thought that we wanted to do, and we'd had a board from APN's early investment. So that was a good discipline for us to have of board meetings, board papers, preparing our financials. And I think even when we were much, much smaller, and probably you'd argue this is overkill, really instilled in us a discipline around that.
What are your legal obligations about that in relation to consumer interactions and consumer protection?
Surprisingly, there are no legal obligations on us. And so that led to a really interesting scenario. We'll sort of fast forward now a little bit to COVID, because the COVID years were incredibly challenging for the events industry, as it was for many, many industries. But events were impacted first, along with international travel and hospitality, with government regulations coming out almost immediately restricting the size of gatherings. And so events were restricted from, you would have potentially had 10, 20,000 people in a stadium, or suddenly you can't have more than 200 people at an event. And in a pretty short space of time, actually, you can't have anyone at an event. Yeah. And so every ticketing company, us included, was refunding millions of dollars in tickets. For us, we had separate trust accounts with the banks that we worked with, and we were able to refund all of those tickets within a very short space of time. It was generally same day, next day, within 2 to 3 business days. But there was no legal obligation on ticket companies to be holding those funds in trust. And there was one ticketing company in New Zealand that wasn't able to refund and became unstuck. And unfortunately for both ticket holders and for the promoters and venues that they worked with, their funds were frozen. They were put into receivership.
That's right. Yeah, were they operating a bit of a Ponzi scheme kind of thing, or not quite that bad?
I couldn't comment on what they were doing, but what was very clear was that they didn't have the funds that they should have had.
And I'd imagine, given the margins that are involved, it would be impractical to carry insurance for that. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's reasonably impractical. I mean, we have cyber policies, and you do wonder to what degree could a cyber policy protect you from that. Mm-hmm. But we built our own system.
Tell me about, is it Viagogo, the ticket resale companies, and the issues that have come up over the last few years? Is it fraudulent? Is it weird scalping? Kind of give us some insight there.
Yeah, is it fraudulent? That's a question that they would have their own answer for. That probably differs a little bit from most of the industry. But essentially, the business model for Viagogo is to present themselves at the top of search results when you're searching for tickets for a specific event. And then the customer goes through and follows the transaction process. Unfortunately, the customer, for whatever reason, whether you say that this is Viagogo's messaging or whatever else you attribute it to, believes that they're buying from the official ticket purchaser. In most cases that I've heard of, they're generally paying significantly more than what the real face value of the tickets are. And we've seen evidence that people have bought tickets from Viagogo for events that actually weren't on sale yet. And so the only way that could be fulfilled, therefore, is for Viagogo to actually sell the ticket and then go and buy the ticket. Yeah.
So let's jump on and talk about the exits. So ultimately it was to Ticketek, or TEG, which is the holding company for Ticketek. But at what stage did the conversation start? How did it play out?
So it's a small industry, and we'd had conversations with TEG over a number of years, but they hadn't gone anywhere for various reasons. We'd talked to others in the industry as well, whether it was a merger with a similarly sized company, or whether it was an exit, whether it was us acquiring someone in another market to try to grow. I think part of the role of the CEO and the board really is ensuring that you're having those conversations, is understanding what the options are. The most recent conversation with TEG started over a year ago, and they approached us having identified that really we operated in a part of the market that they didn't operate in. They are absolutely world class at what they do. If you want to put on multiple AC/DC shows at the same time and sell many hundreds of thousands of tickets a day, they are one of possibly 2 companies in the world who can do that exceptionally well. They operate from that top tier, the biggest arenas and stadiums, all the way down to the mid-market. And Eventfinda, on the other hand, operates at the smallest events that we were talking about. This is the school fairs and fundraisers that might only sell 10, 20, 30 tickets. right up to the mid-market. And so, the biggest venues that we have are the small to mid-sized arenas, very, very small stadiums at the top end, but really the municipal theatres through the regions. That's the area that we excel at.
So they saw it as an opportunity to come from their kind of enterprise, if you like, down into the mid and maybe the small tier of the market as well. That was the strategic opportunity for them.
Yeah, incredibly complementary product offering.
Yeah.
And so what they had seen, then they're a global business.
Yeah.
So TEG operates in a number of markets, 40 markets, I think, with 30 different brands. The biggest brand of those is Ticketek. And the Ticketek operates in a number of markets, but there's a number of markets that they don't. And TEG has a number of touring companies within their portfolio. Some that we would recognise here, the Dainties and Handsome Touring and MJR Presents. But they have a number of different brands under that umbrella, and they tour those brands in various places all over the world in which Ticketek don't operate. And so it was also an opportunity to say, hey, we've got a product that is incredibly nimble. It's easy to stand up in new markets. It's a system that can be self-service, can be general admission, can be allocated seating, and works incredibly well without having to have staff sitting there in front of a computer at a box office, or operations staff running the ticketing at a venue. And so they conducted a search globally, looked at a number of different systems, and eventually came down and talked to us and said, look, we see a huge strategic benefit to bringing you within the TEG family. And we didn't initially see perhaps the full picture of the strategy. We only see what we're seeing in the New Zealand market, a little bit of the Australian market, and we even had a small office over there for 4 years up until COVID. But we couldn't see the scale of the Ticketek business, just like we can't see the scale of the Ticketmaster business. But what we could see was that Live Nation and Ticketmaster and MoshTix and the other smaller ticketing brands that they have operate an incredibly vertically integrated product offering from the smallest events to the biggest, and that we could help TEG to do exactly the same thing.
Okay. Did they approach you directly or through an investment banking partner?
Directly.
Okay, right.
And this is why I say it's a small industry. We all know each other. The MDs of the different ticketing companies all sit on stage on a panel at least once or twice a year.
Right.
Right. We can all, and we've all got a huge amount of respect for each other. We operate in this industry which is incredibly technically challenging, incredibly commercially challenging. We all genuinely have a great deal of respect for each other, and so there's no barriers to having those direct conversations. So they approached us here in New Zealand. I jumped on a plane, went over to Sydney with their head offices and met some of their team over there. And it was the first time for me setting foot in the office and spending a day there presenting on our business, but also having them talk to me about who they are, what they do, and what their approach is and their culture and all of those really absolutely critical things. And what I found from that very first meeting was that they are incredibly smart, incredibly driven people, great individuals. They have a very great, an amazing culture and a roadmap for technology that really was aligned but way beyond anything that we would have ever been able to do ourselves.
Wow. So this is a company that's also many magnitudes bigger than Eventfinda, right?
Hundreds of times bigger.
Hundreds of times, yeah. Okay, so big global giant, essentially. What was that experience like for you of being, James McGlinn, the founder, 20 years at the helm, or at least, co-helming the business, running for the last 10 years as CEO?
Yeah, since 2013. Yeah.
2013. So what was it like for you to walk into there being this, very small kind of thing and them expressing some interest in your business?
It was awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
Their office and just the way everything's set up is very live entertainment, whereas ours is perhaps a little more technology and smell of an oily rag to a certain extent. But the one thing that really struck me was just how respectful they were through the entire. I mean, they could have been talking about how amazing their business was, and how many thousands of times more tickets they sold than us, or whatever it might be. But no, they were just incredibly interested in what we were doing, how we were doing it, what our system was like, what I and we thought the capabilities were, how quickly we could move into other markets, and just how genuine they were around it.
How important was that for you, given that this has been such a significant part of your life for so long? If they had approached you with an attitude of, arrogance, for example, do you think you would have done the deal in the way that you did ultimately?
I don't think it would have happened.
Yeah, okay.
My identity is very caught up in, being the founder, the leader of an independent ticketing company in a market where we're fighting pretty aggressively and competitively against the others, respectfully. But I think they were also very conscious that they didn't want to potentially come in, acquire or even look to acquire a business that might be smothered. Yeah. They saw a business that was operating in its own way, doing really well, with an approach and a culture and a product and a tech stack that was working really well in that part of the market. And they know that they do very, very well at what they do, and they're incredibly proud of it, and quite rightly so. But they were also very mindful that they didn't operate in our space, and that they had parts of their business that could be used to leverage, or that we could leverage, and that could amplify what we were doing, but that they needed to approach that in a way that made sure that we were true to what we had done up until that point, and it had got us to that point. And that was super important, not only for the potential commercial immediate future, but also for bringing a team on, a team that had fiercely been independent, done things their own way, and that, had been out there saying to the market, those guys aren't necessarily right for you, but we are.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a dichotomy you've got to get your head around, right? And how quick did you go from that trip to Sydney to go to not the mothership, but this part of the world mothership, to the stage of there being like an offer tabled or something resembling an offer tabled?
That process probably only took a few months, but the courting process, if you like, itself actually stretched out well over a year.
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of conversations that took place. I spent time over there. There were people from their team who came down here. And it wasn't all completely plain sailing. Like we were certainly not ready to sell. As I mentioned, we had a number of the fundamentals in place, but we certainly weren't earnings optimized. For example, we were trying to break into new markets. We were developing new product. It was very much a case of, you guys understand that we're not in a position where there's a bow tie wrapped around this thing. But there were also unknowns for us. There were things along the way where, we had we had one particular stumble where we sort of went, okay, that's not quite, this area of the business is not quite set up exactly the way that it should be. And they were very understanding of that, understanding that they had come in at a time where it wasn't that they'd taken us by surprise, but, they fully understood that they hadn't, that we hadn't put the business in a position where we would have taken it to market.
So you're in conversations with them. At what stage and who started talking about price?
Yeah, so there was never any doubt about how the valuation was going to be constructed. They were clear from day one. It was always going to be a multiple of earnings. And so that wasn't something that we had focused on, but we had started thinking about, how would we normalize this? What would our P&L look like if we kind of kept two sets of accounts, one for our management accounts for how we were actually running the business, and another set for what it would look like if we were to sell the business, or how it would be run under another entity if someone were to acquire it. So we could start to look at the financial modeling, the valuation modeling on that basis.
Yeah, okay. And at what scale was the business at this stage? So, what was your kind of revenue range?
Yeah, we were under 5 million.
Yeah.
But we had been growing reasonably quickly. We took a real hit when COVID came along, but we had certainly recovered out the other side of that.
Yes. Okay. And what was the multiple?
It was a strategic multiple, as you'd expect. So, I think often when you talk to people about business sales and acquisitions, they're sort of talking about a financial multiple, perhaps in the 3 to 5 zone. We were well beyond that, up into the 10 to 15 times zone. So what that reflected was that we were able to bring a capability into a much larger business that created a huge amount of potential that was well beyond what we could have done ourselves and what we were doing ourselves.
Yes. Okay. And what about for you, James? So co-founded a business 20 years ago, as you've already said, that was a critical part of your identity, had been built into and about that business. And so now you were going to take a journey or take a path in the journey which was quite different from the one that you'd perhaps had been going on up until that point in time. So how did you rationalize the selling of this baby and then what you would do after that?
So it's funny that this question comes up frequently. And for me, it was about an opportunity to realize the vision for the company. So since day one, we had wanted to be an international business. We'd tried ourselves on a number of occasions, going to Australia, going into the United States. We were talking to a business that already had global reach, that had a clear demand for the product and the service that we'd created. And it was very easy to see how slotting Eventfinda into that business was going to realize that vision that we'd had for Eventfinda. So for me, yes, absolutely, my identity had been caught up in being the leader of this small independent startup business. So we still had that startup mentality 20 years on, but it was an incredibly exciting opportunity to realize that vision. And it was really important for me to have spent time with the people at TEG, to have built those relationships up over really an extended period of time through that process, and to be able to see myself working with them. And as I mentioned, they're just so incredibly capable and have so much experience and capability in this specific area, which is really rare. We operate in this niche industry where it's so unusual to meet other people, unless you're going to an international trade convention or something like that, where it's only other ticketing companies. There's no real opportunity to share ideas, experiences, to just play with different ideas and concepts in this space. And then all of a sudden, I'm exposed to this entire team of people who are operating at the absolute top of their game in the space that we've been in for so long. And I think in the first probably 2 to 3 weeks post-acquisition, I feel like I learned more about ticketing than, I'd learned in 20 years.
Wow.
It's just phenomenal, the level at which they operate and the considerations that we just hadn't been exposed to.
Most of the things that you've talked about there are the team, the customer experience, the product, and the opportunity for the business. The question that I've got for you now, James, is what's it like having a job?
I'm loving it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm absolutely loving it. And so I thought back and reflected in the early stages of this conversation about my experience at APN, those 3 months working out of the building in Albert Street. And I wouldn't say that it instilled in me this deep desire to go into that sort of environment. And talking to other entrepreneurs who've exited, and sort of it almost feels like it's anathema to them to have a job and to work within a much larger business. And I get it, and it's not for everyone. I just see so much potential. This business that I'm now part of is, as I've mentioned, one of the best in the world at what it does. It's staffed with absolutely incredible people, and many of them have had reasonably long careers there as well, and some have exited and come back in. But they're incredibly capable. Every single person that I've met over there has been really, really good at what they do and really motivated to do it well. Mm. And it's hard to not be excited and motivated about that. Mm. So I'm absolutely loving it. Part of the acquisition terms is that I will be there for a period of time, and I can see myself being there for a lot longer than that.
Yeah, wow. Okay. You touched on and made quite a strong point of the fact that you and they went quite deep on understanding the values match. You didn't use the word values, but that was what was quite clear. How do we work? How do we solve problems? How do we communicate? Those sorts of things. And so I would make your experience of really enjoying what you're up to and being connected with what their vision and objectives now, relate right back to that thing there. Is there anything else that has made it such a successful, and it is early stages, but it's such a successful acquisition?
I think we have touched on it, but I think the absolutely conscious decisions coming in that we would both act in ways that preserved the integrity of what Eventfinda was doing and how we'd gotten to the point that we were at, and making sure that it was about us adding to what the wider business was already doing rather than us becoming like the wider business. And it's something that we were explicit about. They have been explicit about, not just with me, with my entire team. I think that's critically important.
Yeah, love it. So we've talked about the start, we've talked about the prior ventures, we've talked about the sale journey. Is there anything that is like a hot passion point for you that we haven't talked about that you'd like to explore a little bit?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. Well, you might know my parting question for these conversations. It's the alternate universe career question. So there's another James McGlinn that didn't end up doing a whole lot of things in and around the burgeoning internet space, and then starting a ticketing company, and then, well, that wasn't what he started, but that's what he ended up selling. But he's got this deeply satisfying career. What is that career?
Do you know, I'm a runner.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done a lot of running, done a lot of half marathons, recently did a marathon, and I've done half a dozen triathlons. Maybe I could have been a professional triathlete.
Fascinating.
I would have loved that.
James, so grateful for you taking the time. I know that it's been an intense post-acquisition period for you, backwards and forwards from Sydney and getting the businesses merged and working together. And I'm really excited to follow this next chapter of you having this job thing and then how it might play out over time. Given the glint that you've got in your eye about it, I kind of wonder if you might end up elevating through the ranks of Ticket Tech, and we'll kind of watch and see what happens.
We'll have to come back and do another show, Josh.
Absolutely. How to succeed in a job beyond acquisition. That could be an interesting conversation.
That's it. Yep. Yeah. I'll have more to share on that in the coming years.
Love it. Thanks so much, James.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Your ears are really important to me. If you haven't already, why not check out joshcomrie.com. There's a bunch of free resources on there, a downloadable chapter of my upcoming book, 2 commas, a diagnostic to help you understand where your business may be at in relation to your exit journey. And why not feel free to drop me an email with any feedback that you could have. Any way I and any of us can improve is through feedback. Thanks again for listening.